Welcome to the Institute for Management Studies Leadership Conversations podcast, where we have leading thought leaders discussing their research and identifying ways that you can incorporate it to take your learning and development to the next level. Welcome, everyone, to this IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to highlight relevant research and practical applications from esteemed leadership experts and practitioners to take your leadership to the next level. Today, I'm happy to be joined by Dr. Graeme Codrington, who is an internationally recognized futurist specializing in the future of work. He's also working on a new book about thriving hybrid and remote teams. He helps organizations understand the forces that will shape their lives in the next 10 years and how they can respond confidently to stay ahead of the change. For the past 2 decades, he has worked with some of the world's most recognized brands, traveling to over 80 countries in total and speaking to around 100,000 people every year. Probably the last few years have been more virtual. And he's also the author of 5 best-selling books. Thank you, Graeme, for joining me today.
It's fantastic to be with you. Thanks for the opportunity, Charles.
And in this episode, I really want to focus on how do we thrive in these hybrid and remote teams. And I'd like to start it off with letting our listeners know that you've been doing this your entire life. You've been working from home and doing so successfully. So I'd love for you to share some of your best practices or things that have worked for you that other people can incorporate now that they're faced with a similar situation.
Yeah, Charles, I started life as a CPA at KPMG, or at least did articles towards that, and then went into the IT world immediately after that. And just over 20 years ago, started my own consulting strategic insights firm. And we decided that we wanted, as a group of partners starting a new company, we wanted to live in the future of work, not just talk about it. And we decided that we weren't going to take any offices. And so for the last 22 years, I have never paid a cent in rental. We've paid money to coffee shops. We've hired the odd office here or there if we needed a day or two in an office. But we've lived the virtual world. And we've also engaged with lots of people around the world who have been researching this. A guy, for example, out of Stanford, Professor Nicholas Bloom, is probably the most famous academic who focuses on this. And his TED Talk from 6 years ago now was called, "Tell your boss you're going to work from home and it will be okay." So COVID for us was an acceleration of something we've been seeing coming. And I think now a lot of people who didn't think they could work from home have realized at least some people can, and probably more people than they thought they could, are able to work from home successfully. So we've kind of seen the future arrive in the last 2 or 3 years.
I think we all have. And I love what you say regarding that we should not be measuring people anymore about the number of hours they worked or where they worked.
Yeah.
We should have more of an output-based mindset.
Exactly. And so here's a simple progression, 3 steps. The first step is if you can work from anywhere. Not everybody can, so there's a big capital IF at the beginning of that sentence. But if you can, then if you're not restricted to an office, should you be restricted to office hours? You know, if you're not working at the office, why should you work the hours that the office normally requests of you? And if, again, a nice big if, but if you can be more flexible in when you work, then maybe you can open the conversation to just ignoring the hours completely. In other words, you shift from saying to people, I'm going to measure your inputs and how many hours you work, to just say, it doesn't matter. I'm going to measure your outputs. It's a much more difficult conversation because actually, as it happens, outputs can be difficult to measure. But I think that this is probably the biggest future of work conversation coming our way. And COVID has pointed us down the path. There's still quite a path to walk down to get to this outputs-driven mindset.
No, that's great. And I love that approach versus the approach where a lot of people feel that they're stuck at home and pretending to be at the office, which is really the worst of both worlds, right? Because they're not getting the benefits of being in either place.
And you know what? Not everybody has enjoyed working from home. I think it's a real privilege if you have a home that allows you to work nicely in the home environment. That probably means you've got a spare room somewhere that you've probably converted into office space. You've probably got the technology and the data access. Not everybody's got this. And certainly your younger staff members are unlikely to have it. They may be living in a commune environment or maybe even still with their parents. So yes, not everybody found that working from home was a fantastic experience. But I think that everybody found that having more autonomy was motivating. That being an environment where I could choose, as far as possible, where I could choose to say, well, under what conditions am I going to do my best work? And I think that that's guidance, if you like, for the conversation over the next few years in the future, which is instead of saying you have to come back to the office or coming up with some random number about how many days you need to be in the office and how many days you could work from home. And as you say, worst case scenario is that we're at home, but we've got to dress up in a suit. We've got to start working at 8 o'clock. We do a Zoom check-in to make sure that we're all suited up and ready to go for the day. You did the worst of both worlds, surely. And so what I think good management technique is going to be in the near to distant future over the next few years is to have this ongoing conversation with our teams, which simply asks that question. Given what we have to do, under what conditions will we do our best work? It might mean that on Tuesday, we all have to be in the office together. That's going to be the best way to get our task done. But on Wednesday, Thursday, be flexible, choose your own operating environment, if you like. Yeah, it's a different approach to management, a different approach to leadership, but I think one that's well overdue as it happens.
I'm in complete agreement with that. But there are temptations in regardless of the environment. And you mentioned three big ones at home. So, and you mentioned bed, TV, and fridge. I would also probably throw in any electronic device or your phone, but I guess you can take that phone with you as well when you go to the office. So they need to be mindful of those as well so that they can be focused and productive, because in some cases, I've seen it personally and professionally where there's just more temptations in the home environment that's going to distract them and prevent them from having that output mindset or producing at the same level rather.
Yes and no, Charles. I mean, let's be honest. There are lots of ways that you can look busy at the office and not actually be as productive as all of that. And I'd argue that quite a few of those things are normal parts of corporate culture. Setting up meetings with your colleagues can really make you look busy and not actually deliver and be productive. And I think that where we are at the moment, even if you as a leader of a team think I'd much prefer my team at the office rather than at home because you're a little bit nervous of some of the possibilities of being distracted at home, even if you do bring people back to the office, what a wonderful opportunity we have at this moment in history to not just go back to the way it was 2-3 years ago, to not just go back to how things used to be, but to really take the opportunity that a crisis and a disruption gives us to reimagine and to recontract, to make our workplaces truly productive and engaging and valuable places to be. So yes, there are distractions available at home, but I'd argue that the office was a fairly distracting place before COVID, and we can do better. Whether we're at home at the office, I think we could do better.
Well, fair enough, and I'll give you that one. For this definition, I think we need to even broaden it, right? And you argue this too, is that it's not just work from home, it's work from anywhere.
Yeah.
That's the revolution that's been happening, and it's already here, and it was already here prior to COVID. COVID just accelerated it for many businesses, but it's not something new that happened as a result of COVID.
Look, a lot of teams have been working with remote team members for many, many years. If you're a large organization with teams in different states, or you're an international organization with teams around the globe, you've had to work this way for many, many years. Technology, communication technology, the internet and so on, has really accelerated our ability to be able to work in these cross time zone and spread out geographic teams. So for many teams, COVID wasn't something that disrupted them. It simply just forced them to move home. But they had already been used to the remote environment or the hybrid environment. And it's just now a case of us realizing that many, many more people are going to be able to work in either that remote meaning that you sort of never interact with your colleagues except for the quarterly face-to-face or the annual convention, hybrid being that sometimes you're face-to-face and sometimes you're at home or at a coffee shop or at a pay-by-the-hour office environment. It's just hybrid is sort of the maximum flexibility available. But whether it's a remote, virtual, hybrid, or a mixture of all of the above, I just think that all that COVID did was prove to us that more people can do this, and that there are technologies and systems that we can implement and learn that will make it work. And so now the question is, under what conditions do we do our best work, and give people a sense of autonomy and a sense that we trust them to get on and do the work. I don't think the solution is for everybody to stay at home as much as possible, because there are things that are better when we are face to face, when we are in the same room. And I think especially for new joiners and juniors in the business, I think it's really, really tough to not be in a physical space with the team. I think it's a lot easier when you're in senior leadership and you've got a couple of years or a decade or so under your belt in the industry. I would hate to be going through my CPA articles during lockdown, and my daughters who are at college, I think have struggled, because younger people and new joiners to your business, whatever their actual age is, I think will have huge benefits from being in a physical space. But these are the conversations we're going to have and have to have now, rather than just mandating one thing or the other. I think flexibility and adaptability are two key words for the years ahead.
I think that's an important point, right? It's not going to be a one size fits all approach, and every team, every corporation is a little bit different. And you state that there's really 5 things that companies do right, the 5 pillars. And you've mentioned this one a few times, autonomy. So why don't we start with that one? Having them have a more independent feel being at home, but it needs to be balanced, right? That sense of independence needs to be balanced with, you want that connection, but you want them to be competent, or that sense of mastery needs to happen as well.
So what you're referencing there, Charles, is some work that we actually started about 4 or 5 years ago, where we were looking at what are some of the key ingredients to healthy hybrid teams. As I say, this is 5 years ago. So before COVID, when we were trying to convince some of our clients that this was going to be a key feature of the future of work. And by a key feature, here's really what I mean. If you want to attract and retain the best talent, especially if you're looking at a younger generation of talent, you're going to have to realize they don't want to come to a workplace that feels like their parents' workplace, in the sense that you sign up when you come out of college and you stick around for many, many years and you work your way up the hierarchy, and you arrive at a certain day and you clock in and you clock out at the end of the day. Today's young people see the world very, very differently. So technology is driving it, a new generation is driving it, multinational globalization is driving it, all sorts of forces we're pushing in this direction. So we've been working on this. It's not a model. We don't see it as a sort of leadership competency framework. We use the language of ingredients. It's 5 ingredients that you can add to your team dynamics, whether your team is an in-person, in the room team, or a completely virtual, spread around the world team. Add these ingredients, work out what these ingredients mean for you, and you'll be fine. So with that as background, you're absolutely right. We've mentioned autonomy, and that's the key piece of any employee engagement model. You can go back to guys like Dan Pink in his book Drive, who talks about the surprising science of what motivates people. You can look at pretty much any motivational model you've ever seen, and autonomy is going to be somewhere in those models. It's about independence, agency, and people feeling trusted, that they are trusted to get on with the job. But if autonomy is left on its own, it can be very dangerous, because if autonomy is divorced from the sense of belonging that people had. So if you're taking notes, autonomy, if we want to put these in an order, I'd put autonomy as number 3 of our 5 ingredients. The first is belonging, which is the sense of connection with your team. And these connections come 2 key things. And if you want to get something practical that you can try as you listen to this, to improving belonging is the very easiest as well as the most important starting point for building your hybrid team culture. And it's based on 2 things as a starting point, at least. The first is personal connections between the members of the team. Do they know each other? Do they like each other? That's ideal. Have they got a sense of personal connection? And then the second is, what are the rituals, rhythms, and routines of the team itself? So is there something you do every morning? Is there something you do every Monday? Is there something you do on the last Friday of the month? Is there something you do in the first week of every quarter? And these rituals, routines, and rhythms give a sense of connectedness and a sense of belonging. So you must have the autonomy where people feel, I'm an independent person, but you must have belonging. That's the flip side, where people feel, but I'm connected to this group of people, and we're a team together. So you get those 2 things right, and you're starting to build a solid foundation.
I would say that it's more difficult in this day and age with remote and hybrid teams to have that sense of belonging, or at least you need to be more deliberate in creating this, because it doesn't happen as naturally as if they're in the same physical location, which it still may not happen, but there's other contributing factors that I feel make it easier at the office than it does on these teams, because we see that now loneliness is increasing, depression rates are increasing. So you see this lack of connectedness, which, yes, they're independent, but like you said, if it's taken to its extreme, there's no connection, there's no sense of belonging, and that can be equally detrimental to the team's effectiveness.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right, Charles. And we know that this was a problem well before COVID. I mean, if you're familiar with the WeWork story, and as you and I are recording this, Netflix is, Apple TV, in fact, is rolling out a wonderful series called We Crashed, which kind of gives us the backstory to WeWork. And the WeWork story was not just a co-working space story. It was a story about the younger generations in our workplaces feeling disconnected, feeling lonely, feeling like work was meaningless because this belonging element didn't exist. We created all of these drone-like offices, and WeWork was really, in addition to everything else it was in the background, what attracted people to WeWork was not the physical space, it was the connectedness that people had. So we know that this is something that's been missing in the workplace for a while. We know it's something that is important. And we know that in many cases, it just happened organically in the physical space. If everybody's arriving at roughly the same time at the office, and you're standing around the water cooler or the coffee station and you're chatting and you're talking about last night's sports game or some kind of political event that's taking place in the world, you're creating that sense of connectedness. You may or may not have a uniform that people wear. I mean, literally, you might have branded clothing that people wear that creates a sense of belonging. Even if you don't, I'd hesitate to point out that I could pretty much tell from about 1,000 paces which industry people were in at an industry conference, because you might not think you've got a uniform, but all the bankers wear white shirts and dark suits, and all the engineers wear blue shirts. So even those little things that are subconscious were there in the physical space. What you have to do in a hybrid or virtual space is be a lot more deliberate. And the most simple practical advice I can give you is to say that you should have connection meetings. In fact, I argue you should have more meetings in the virtual space. Don't freak out yet. There wasn't a full stop at the end of that sentence. You should have more shorter meetings, because in the virtual space, your meetings should be a lot more focused. So if you want to have a setup for the week meeting, then schedule it for 15 minutes and set up for the week, and then be done with the meeting. In a virtual world, you can do that. You can log in, log out of a meeting very, very easy. Don't have a 3-hour meeting every Monday that includes 5 different major activities. And therefore, one of those meetings in the week can be a connection meeting with the sole purpose of you just getting to know each other. And yeah, it might sound a little bit cheesy and corny, and some of you might be going, "Oh, I don't like that team building stuff, Graeme." I hear you. I don't like that either. So maybe get somebody who's good at it to facilitate it and manage it. I think you'll discover that getting to know the people you work with is absolutely essential to working well with them.
That's great advice and some great practical tips on that sense of belonging. Autonomy is really through that output-based mindset, so that they aren't so constrained with what they're doing. You give 5 of these ingredients. The mastery you put second, which is the need for skills and
Yep.
technology, and how can you build this. 4th one I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into, and that is generosity, because I think that's also a challenge in a virtual environment, showing empathy and being there for others, because you feel more disconnected. Once you're connected, then hopefully you have that, but it's still, the emotional intelligence element still needs to be there. But in some cases, would you agree that it takes different forms in a virtual environment, or it's harder to read in a virtual environment than it is if they were in person?
Absolutely. And thank you, Charles, for doing some of the research and reading in advance of this conversation, because I'm still fighting with myself and the rest of my team about this label generosity. Because a lot of people, when they think generosity, they think maybe charity, and they think it's my company giving money away and so on. And that's probably part of it. To work for a generous company is probably motivating and nice and valuable, but it's exactly as you framed it. When we're using the language of generosity, and we're borrowing this from 2 very distinct models. The one is Dan Pink's model, and the other is an interesting one. It comes out of First Nation tribes in Canada. It's called the Circle of Courage, and it's a model of how young people present themselves into the adult community. And one of the things they have to demonstrate is a sense of a generous spirit in giving back some of what they are good at. So if we think of the other pieces of our puzzle, it's mastery and autonomy. And mastery means I'm good at what I do and I can contribute to the team. And autonomy means I get on and do it. But if those are the 2 focus areas, you're not building a really great team. The generosity piece is when I then take what I'm good at and apply it for the good of others. And that means I must, you used wonderful words there, empathy and care. I must look around at my colleagues and I must see, does anybody need help? If you prefer business language, then where's the mentoring in the system? Is there reverse mentoring going on? And Charles, you're absolutely right. In a physical space, this is when I swivel my chair around and I turn to the person behind me, who I know has got 5 years experience on me. And I say to them, I'm not quite sure how to do this. Can you just quickly, and they swivel their chair and go, oh, it's easy. Just click on that and just do that. Or they overhear me on a phone call to a client. And at the end of the call, they turn around and they say, are you sure that's how you want to handle that situation next time, Graeme? That's just, let me give you some advice. Because we're in each other's spaces, we're kind of overhearing, and in the best of teams, we're giving that informal advice and that informal interaction that just help you to develop and grow. I remember that from my times as an article clerk. That's quite a lot of the training, where you literally just go and sit in on a client meeting with the senior. You've got nothing to do, nothing to contribute and say, and everything to learn. And I wonder if we've done enough of that, especially those of us who are more senior. I wonder if we've done enough thinking about how are we helping younger, junior, new joiner people in our team to develop their skill set and to feel confident and competent in their contributions to the team. That's what generosity is. And it's thinking about others in the team, where it's more difficult to think about them in a hybrid environment because you're on your own doing your work. So for us, that is an absolutely key ingredient in a healthy hybrid team.
And I love that you included that ingredient in there, because you're right, it's a critical element. And moving on then to the fifth and the final one, and that's purpose, having a sense of making a difference in the world. And I love how you phrase this, and I really want to emphasize this point. Not every job changes the world, but if you give your employees a sense of purpose in their work, that's essential. And that's so well stated. And I just want our listeners to make sure that they get that, because when you think of purpose, sometimes it's okay, I'm not going to be a difference maker in our society or even maybe in our local community, but everyone can help others to have a sense of purpose in what they're doing.
You know, and I want to push that point even further than you've pushed it there, Charles, because I think I'm beginning to work out how to help leaders and managers to get this one right. Yes, of course, we want to invite people to feel purpose-filled and purpose-led in the work that they do with our company. But I wonder if we shouldn't be thinking about just having a conversation with our colleagues and with our teams and just saying, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What feels like it's really purpose-filled in your personal life? Now, I wonder whether 2 or 3 years ago, that might have felt like a very weird question. And if my boss came at me with that question, I'd kind of want to say, back off, that's not your territory. You know, we've got work, we've got life, and you don't get to ask me those questions. But we've spent the last 2 years looking into each other's houses, literally through Zoom windows. And we've heard their kids talking in the background, and we've watched their cats walk across their keyboards. And I'm not trying to make light of the COVID environment. I genuinely think that we've somehow in the last 2 years broken down a little bit of this divide. So for me, we've gone further than just work-life balance or work-life integration conversations. And I think, let me give you a very practical example. I think working mothers have had the worst of COVID. I think it's been the toughest to be a mother in the last 2 years. And I just imagine, as a mother, a working mother, your colleagues and your boss came alongside you and just said, how do we help you to live a better life? How do we help you to enjoy the life you're living more? And, you know, if allowing you to come into the office an hour later might make all the difference in the world, that might be helping you to fulfill your purpose. Because, to be honest, your main purpose is to be a mother. You've got this job so that you can put some money in a bank account so you can be a better mother. And I think if we can help our colleagues and our teams and our employees to be more purpose-filled in all of their lives, knowing that their work in our team, their employment in our company is part of that purpose fulfillment. Am I being too idealistic, Charles? I don't think so. I hope not. And I hope that many people understand what I'm pushing towards, because I think if we get it right, we could build a fantastic world in which everybody feels like they're getting the best of all worlds rather than the worst of worlds. You won't be stuck at home pretending to be at the office. You'll be living your life with work and life beautifully integrated to help you fulfill your purpose.
No, that's very well said. Completely agree with you. And that's also a great way to help companies keep talent during the Great Resignation, to look at it in this
Absolutely.
framework, to build more connection, to give them more purpose so that they're more productive, they're happier in what they're doing, and they're more vested in the company and in their work, because we want to be managing their work around their lives instead of managing their life around their work. So we really need to put it in the proper context, and I think that does it beautifully. As we reach the end of the episode, I always like to have a call to action, Graeme. Is there one thing that you can give our listeners that would really help them out to get this right? Is there one of the 5 ingredients or something that they can start with to say, okay, we want to get this right with our teams. We want to have thriving hybrid and remote teams. What is that first thing they could do?
I think we've mentioned this already, but let's put it in an action language. Why don't you set yourself the goal for the next, pick a fixed number of weeks. It might be 3 weeks, 5 weeks, not longer than that. So it's a month or so in which you deliberately experiment with an outputs-driven mindset. That you deliberately experiment with having conversations with your team saying, over the next few weeks, you organize your life in the way that you think will make you most productive. Now, that's probably in a team going to have a little bit of negotiation, because if my work relies on your work, then you can't start working at 2 p.m. if I'd like to start working at 9 a.m. So there'll be a little bit of negotiation and a little bit of bartering around some of the aspects of this for a team. But experiment, Charles, would be my advice to people. Don't sit down, think it through, talk it through, and then say, no, it won't work, or yes, it will. But deliberately create experiments in which you try and move away from counting hours and managing inputs, and encourage your team to bring ideas of what an outputs-driven environment might look like. Try it for a few weeks, see what you learn from it, and then only make your decisions about what that might look like for you.
Love that call to action. That seems to be what everyone's doing these days, is having these small experiments, seeing what works best, and then iterating it based on or tweaking the model if needed. Also want to ask you, is there a recent book, podcast that's inspired you lately that you'd like to share with our listeners?
You know, I think the best book I've read in the last 5 years is Adam Grant's Think Again. And I actually think that's a great place for many people to start. He's a Stanford professor of psychology, and his book really just says we get stuck. We get stuck in our ways of thinking. We get stuck in our confirmation bias, this cognitive bias that our brains are programmed to prove ourselves right. The things we already believe, we try and find proof for. And what he does is he lays out a wonderful path for you to learn the skill set of unlearning and rethinking. And that's probably a more important skill set than anything else we could learn at the moment. So Adam Grant, Think Again. Also follow him on all the social platforms. He's got a wonderful set of feeds in which he puts daily inspiration to think again and to change, especially the way that we work.
One of my favorite authors as well, and that's a great book. Graeme, remind our listeners how they can reach out and get in contact with you.
Thank you. So the easiest is to just look me up, Graeme Codrington. Graeme spelt the Scottish way rather than the way you might be familiar with it more in the United States. But I'm sure my name is in the show notes of this podcast, and graemecodrington.com is the easiest place to find me.
Thank you, Graeme, for your time today. It was great getting to catch up with you.
Thanks, Charles.
This concludes this episode of the IMS Leadership Conversations podcast. You can send us your feedback at info@ims-online.com. If you'd like to subscribe, this podcast can be found both on Apple and Spotify. And until next time, remember, it's not what you know that makes a difference, it's what you do consistently.